When a millionaire's daughter was nearly crushed by a steel beam, a humble construction worker didn't just save her life, he changed everything she thought she knew about herself. What happened next will show you that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be bought with money. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, what's the most unexpected act of kindness you've ever witnessed? The morning sun cast long shadows across the Manhattan construction site as Elena Rodriguez stepped out of her sleek black Tesla, her designer heels clicking against the concrete. At 28, she had everything her father's construction empire could buy: a penthouse apartment, a closet full of designer clothes, and a trust fund that could last 3 lifetimes. But as she surveyed the skeletal framework of what would become another luxury high rise, something felt hollow inside her chest. "Miss Rodriguez is here," called out the site foreman, his voice carrying across the bustling construction zone. Hard hats turned in her direction, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed resentment. Elena wasn't surprised. She was the boss's daughter who showed up in $1,000 outfits while they worked 12-hour shifts in the summer heat. 3 floors up, Marcus Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his work glove. At 35, his hands told the story of 15 years in construction, calloused, scarred, but steady and strong. His weathered face bore the kind of lines that came from squinting into the sun and worrying about making rent while raising 2 kids on his own. When he saw the fancy car pull up, he shook his head and returned to positioning a massive steel beam with his crew. "Rich girls here again," muttered his work partner Jake. "Probably going to tell us we're doing everything wrong." Marcus didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that judgment was a luxury he couldn't afford. People were people, regardless of their bank account, and everyone had their own struggles, even if some struggles looked different from the outside. Elena made her way across the site, stepping carefully around equipment and debris. She was here on her father's orders to learn the business from the ground up, though she suspected it was really his way of keeping her busy while he groomed her younger brother for the real leadership role. The thought stung, but she pushed it down like she always did. She was examining the blueprints spread across a makeshift table when she heard the mechanical groan above her head. The crane operator had miscalculated the load distribution, and a 2-ton steel beam was swinging dangerously close to breaking free from its cables. Most of the workers were too far away to notice, but Marcus, 3 floors up, saw everything unfold in horrifying slow motion. "Elena!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the construction noise like a blade. She looked up, confused by the use of her first name from a stranger, just as Marcus launched himself down the scaffolding with reckless abandon. His work boots clanged against metal rungs as he descended, his heart pounding not from the physical exertion, but from the knowledge that he had maybe 3 seconds to reach her. The beam broke free with a metallic shriek that seemed to silence the entire construction site. Elena froze, her mind unable to process the ton of steel plummeting toward her. Marcus hit the ground running and threw his entire body weight against her, sending them both tumbling behind a concrete barrier just as the beam crashed where she'd been standing, sending sparks and debris flying in every direction. For a moment, the world was completely silent except for the ringing in Elena's ears. She found herself pressed against the concrete, Marcus's protective arms wrapped around her head, his hard hat askew and his face inches from hers. She could smell his cologne mixed with honest sweat, could see the concern etched in his brown eyes, could feel his heart hammering against his chest. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the chaos around them. His hands moved carefully, checking for injuries without being inappropriate, the way a father might examine a child who'd taken a fall. Elena tried to speak, but found her voice had abandoned her. She shook her head, still stunned by how quickly everything had happened. Around them, the construction site erupted into activity as workers rushed over and supervisors shouted orders. But for those few seconds, it felt like they were the only 2 people in the world. "Hey, breathe," Marcus said, noticing her shallow, rapid breathing. "You're safe now. Just breathe with me, okay?" He demonstrated slow, deep breaths, his calm presence somehow cutting through her panic. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it." As her breathing steadied, Elena became aware of how this must look. The boss's daughter being cradled by a construction worker, both of them covered in dust and debris. She should have been embarrassed, should have pulled away and reasserted her position. Instead, she found herself studying his face, noting the kindness in his eyes and the gentle way he was treating her, like she was something precious rather than just another rich person's problem. "I'm Marcus," he said as he helped her to her feet, his hand steady at her elbow. "Marcus Thompson. Are you sure you're not hurt? That was a close one." Elena, she managed, then cleared her throat. I mean, thank you. You saved my life. The words felt inadequate for what had just happened. Marcus brushed dust off his hard hat and settled it back on his head. Just doing what anyone would do, he said. But Elena caught the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his tool belt. He'd been scared too, she realized. Scared for her. Anyone wouldn't have moved that fast, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Anyone wouldn't have risked their own safety for a stranger. A slight smile tugged at the corner of Marcus's mouth. Well, we're not strangers anymore, are we? The site foreman reached them, breathless and red-faced with panic. Miss Rodriguez, oh my God, are you all right? Your father's going to... We need to call an ambulance. We need to... I'm fine, Elena interrupted, her eyes still on Marcus. Thanks to him. But Marcus was already stepping back, melting into the crowd of concerned workers. Elena watched him go, something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. She'd been saved, protected, cared for, not because of who her father was or what she could offer in return, but simply because she was a human being in danger. That evening, Elena couldn't stop thinking about the construction worker who'd risked everything for her. She'd grown up surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Her father's connections, her trust fund, her influence. But Marcus had asked for nothing, expected nothing, and disappeared back into his work as if saving lives was just part of his daily routine. The next morning, she returned to the construction site with a different purpose. Instead of her usual designer attire, she wore jeans and sneakers, carrying a box of coffee and donuts from the expensive bakery near her apartment. The workers eyed her suspiciously as she approached. Is Marcus Thompson here? She asked the foreman. Thompson, lady's asking for you. The foreman shouted up toward the scaffolding. Marcus appeared at the edge of the platform, looking confused. When he saw Elena, his expression shifted to concern. Everything okay? You're not having delayed shock or anything, are you? I brought coffee, she said, lifting the box. For everyone. And I wanted to say thank you properly. Marcus climbed down, wiping his hands on his jeans. Up close in the morning light, Elena could see that he was probably about 7 years older than her, with laugh lines around his eyes and a scar across his knuckles that looked like it had come from years of hard work. You didn't need to do that, he said, but she could see he was pleased. But the guys will appreciate it. Coffee truck doesn't come around until noon. As Elena distributed coffee and pastries, she found herself lingering near Marcus, asking questions about the construction process that she'd never bothered to learn despite growing up in the business. He answered patiently, explaining how the crane system worked and why safety protocols were so important, his love for the craft evident in every word. My dad always said construction was about building things that last, she said, watching him secure a safety line. But I never really understood what that meant. Marcus paused in his work. It means every beam, every bolt, every weld matters. One weak point and the whole thing can come down. But when you do it right, when you build something solid, he gestured toward the growing structure around them. It becomes part of people's lives. Families will live here, kids will take their first steps on these floors, people will fall in love in these rooms. That's worth getting right. Elena stared at him, struck by the poetry in his practical words. You really love this, don't you? It's honest work, Marcus said simply. You put in effort, you get results. You can see what you've accomplished at the end of each day. There was something in his tone that made Elena ask, what about when you go home? What's waiting for you there? Marcus's expression softened. Two of the best kids in the world. My daughter Sarah's 12. Thinks she's going to be an architect someday. My son Tommy's 8, wants to drive a crane when he grows up. He pulled out his phone and showed her his lock screen. 2 smiling children with his eyes and his smile. Lost their mom 3 years ago in a car accident. Been just the 3 of us since then. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. I'm so sorry. Thanks, Marcus said, tucking his phone away. They're good kids, strong kids. They keep me going. Over the following weeks, Elena found excuses to visit the construction site. Sometimes she brought lunch for the crew. Sometimes she just sat on a stack of lumber and watched them work. The workers gradually warmed up to her, sharing stories about their families and their lives outside the site. But it was Marcus she looked forward to seeing most. She learned that he'd been working construction since he was 20, that he'd met his wife at a community college where they were both taking night classes, that he coached his son's little league team on weekends and helped his daughter with her math homework every night after work. You could do anything, she told him one afternoon as they ate sandwiches together during his lunch break. With your work ethic, your intelligence, You could run your own company and make 10 times what you're making now. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Money's not everything, he said finally. I make enough to keep my kids fed and housed and happy. I'm here when they need me. I sleep well at night knowing I did good work. That's wealth, the way I see it. Elena had never heard anyone talk about wealth that way. In her world, wealth was numbers in bank accounts, square footage in Manhattan, the ability to buy whatever you wanted whenever you wanted it. But listening to Marcus talk about tucking his kids into bed every night, about the pride he took in his work, about the simple satisfaction of a job well done, she began to understand that maybe she'd been measuring richness all wrong. The revelation came on a Thursday afternoon when Elena overheard Marcus on a phone call during his break. His voice was strained, worried in a way she'd never heard before. I understand, doctor, but there has to be something we can do. She's 12 years old. No, I don't have insurance that covers experimental treatments. I see. No, I understand. Thank you. Elena watched from across the site as Marcus hung up and sat heavily on a stack of wooden planks, his head in his hands. Every instinct she'd been raised with told her to mind her own business, but something stronger pulled her toward him. Marcus, is everything okay? He looked up, and she was shocked to see tears in his eyes. It's Sarah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My daughter. She's been having these headaches, and we finally got to see a specialist. There's a tumor. It's not malignant, but it's in a tricky spot. The surgery... He stopped, unable to continue. Elena sat beside him on the wooden planks. What about the surgery? It's experimental. Insurance won't cover it. It costs more than I make in 2 years. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The doctor says she'll probably be fine without it, but there's a chance it could affect her vision, her cognitive function. She wants to be an architect, Elena. She draws these amazing buildings, spends hours designing dream houses. What if I can't give her the chance to see those dreams clearly? Elena's heart broke watching this strong, capable man crumble under the weight of a parent's worst fear. How much? She asked. 200,000, Marcus said, the number falling between them like a stone. Elena's mind raced. $200,000, less than she'd spent on her car, a fraction of her trust fund's monthly interest. Marcus, I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me, he said quickly. I needed to tell someone. You've become a good friend these past few weeks. A friend. The word should have felt small, but coming from Marcus, it felt like the most valuable thing anyone had ever given her. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She paced her penthouse apartment, looking out at the glittering city lights, thinking about Marcus sitting in some small apartment somewhere, probably lying awake wondering how to save his daughter's future. She thought about all the money she'd spent on things that didn't matter, all the opportunities she'd wasted, and all the ways she'd been living her life on the surface, while Marcus was dealing with real problems, real fears, real love. She thought about the way he'd thrown himself down that scaffolding to save her, not because he knew who she was, but because she was a person in danger. She thought about the way he talked about his work, his children, his late wife. She thought about the way he'd made her feel valued not for her bank account or her connections, but for her questions, her interest, her willingness to learn. The next morning, Elena didn't go to the construction site. Instead, she went to her bank, then to her lawyer, then to the hospital where Sarah Thompson was scheduled for pre-surgical consultations she couldn't afford. It took her most of the day to arrange everything. The payment to the hospital, anonymous but earmarked specifically for Sarah Thompson's care. The legal paperwork to ensure Marcus could never trace it back to her. The careful coordination with the medical team to make it seem like a research grant had suddenly become available. She was exhausted but oddly exhilarated when she finally made it to the construction site late that afternoon. She found Marcus exactly where she expected him, working methodically through his tasks despite the weight on his shoulders, because that's the kind of man he was. Elena, he called when he saw her, and her heart did something strange at the way his face lit up. I was worried when you didn't come by this morning. Just had some errands to run, she said, trying to keep her voice casual. How are you holding up? Marcus's smile faded. Honestly, I've been better, but I'll figure something out. I always do. Elena was about to respond when Marcus's phone rang. She watched his face as he answered, saw the confusion, then the disbelief, then the tears. Are you sure, he was saying? A research grant? For Sarah specifically? Yes, of course we accept. Thank you. Thank you so much. He hung up and stared at his phone for a long moment before looking at Elena with wonder-struck eyes. They're going to do the surgery, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Some kind of research grant came through. They're going to do the surgery and it's not going to cost us anything. Elena felt tears prick her own eyes as she watched this good man receive the miracle he'd been praying for. That's wonderful, Marcus. Sarah's going to be fine. I can't believe it, he said. And then, to Elena's surprise, he pulled her into a fierce hug. I was so scared, Elena. I was so damn scared, and now she's going to be okay. Elena held him as he cried tears of relief into her shoulder, and she realized that this moment, seeing his joy, knowing she'd played a part in saving his daughter's future, felt better than anything she'd ever bought, any party she'd ever attended, any privilege she'd ever enjoyed. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. Elena found herself spending more time at the hospital than at the construction site, bringing Marcus coffee during the long wait, making sure he ate, sitting quietly beside him when words weren't enough. You don't have to do this, he told her, as they sat in uncomfortable hospital chairs, watching the surgical board for updates on Sarah's procedure. I know you probably have more important things to do. Elena looked at this man who'd risked his life for her, who worked his hands raw to provide for his children, who treated her like she mattered not because of what she had, but because of who she was becoming. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, she said, and meant it. When the surgeon finally emerged with news that the operation had been a complete success, Marcus cried again. This time, Elena cried with him. Meeting Sarah and Tommy changed something fundamental in Elena's understanding of wealth. Sarah, despite her recent surgery, was bright and curious, showing Elena sketch after sketch of buildings she'd designed, explaining her architectural ideas with the kind of passion Elena had never felt for anything in her life. Tommy was all energy and questions, wanting to know if Elena had ever driven a crane, if she thought his dad was the strongest man in the world, if she wanted to see the Lego construction site he'd built in his bedroom. Dad talks about you a lot, Sarah said one evening when Elena was visiting, her young face serious despite the surgical bandages. He says you're different from what he expected. Different how? Elena asked, genuinely curious. He says you ask good questions, and you listen to the answers. Most people don't really listen. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. She thought about all the conversations she'd had in her life, all the networking events and business dinners where people talked at each other rather than to each other, where every interaction was a transaction, every relationship a potential advantage. Your dad's pretty special, Elena told Sarah. Both of you are. Are you going to marry him? Tommy asked with the blunt curiosity of an 8-year-old, making both Elena and Sarah laugh. Tommy! Sarah scolded, but she was grinning. Elena felt her cheeks warm. Your dad and I are friends, she said. Good friends? Tommy pressed. Elena looked across the hospital room where Marcus was talking to a nurse, his attention focused completely on understanding Sarah's post-surgical care instructions. She watched the careful way he took notes, the questions he asked, the love evident in every line of his body language. Yes, she said softly. Very good friends. As Sarah recovered, Elena found herself integrated into their small family's routine in ways that surprised her. She helped Tommy with his homework when Marcus was working late. She brought Sarah art supplies and listened to her architectural dreams. She learned to cook simple meals in Marcus's small but warmth-filled apartment, discovering that food tasted better when it was shared with people you cared about. I never thanked you properly, Marcus said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. The kids were in the living room, Sarah drawing while Tommy built elaborate structures with his Legos. For what? Elena asked, though she had a feeling she knew. For being here, for caring about my kids, he paused, searching for words. For seeing us, really seeing us. Elena set down the dish she'd been drying and turned to face him fully. You saved my life, Marcus. I mean, after that. You could have sent a thank you card and moved on. Instead, you've become... He gestured around the small kitchen, at the homework papers on the counter, at the art supplies scattered on the table, at the life they'd somehow built together over the past few months. You've become family. Family. Elena had grown up in a house with every luxury money could buy, but she'd never felt the kind of belonging she felt in Marcus's tiny apartment with its secondhand furniture and crayon drawings on the refrigerator. I love them, she said, the words surprising her with their truth. I love Sarah's big dreams and Tommy's endless energy. I love the way they look at the world like it's full of possibilities. And what about their old man? Marcus asked, stepping closer to her. What do you think about him? Elena's heart hammered as she looked up into his brown eyes, seeing in them the same kindness he'd shown her that first day, deepened now by months of friendship and shared moments and quiet understanding. I think, she said carefully, that that he's the most genuinely good person I've ever met. I think he's taught me more about what really matters than anyone in my life. I think, she took a deep breath, I think I've been falling in love with him for months and just didn't have the courage to admit it. Marcus cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. Elena Rodriguez, he said, smiling, you've been changing my life since the day I met you. Their first kiss tasted like coffee and promise, interrupted by Tommy's delighted, I knew it, from the doorway. 6 months later, Elena stood at the altar of a small community church, wearing a simple white dress she'd chosen not because it was designer, but because Marcus had told her she looked beautiful in white. The wedding was small. Sarah and Tommy as the wedding party, a handful of friends from the construction site, Marcus's sister who'd flown in from Ohio.